Right.
Can we come to order? So, committee, we will start with committee business and the subcommittee or the steering committee on finance met the other day, and the clerk has handed out a report of the conclusions of that, the subcommittee discussions, and that is before you. It's the first report. We would need a motion to accept this. Maybe I should explain it a little bit. On point one, we've agreed that KPMG would be invited before the committee on Tuesday, May 3rd, for a 90-minute televised meeting on the committee study of the Canada Revenue Agency's effort to combat tax avoidance and evasion, and that the last 30 minutes would be set up for committee business. Point two, that the committee hear from the Honourable Minister of Finance and officials from the Department of Finance on Thursday, May 5th. We're having a little discussion on whether that's still possible. The Minister's office had confirmed with me they thought that was doable, so that's subject to confirmation from the Minister's office. Point number three, that the week from May 9th to May 13th be set aside for a series of televised meetings to consider the Budget Implementation Act. That is subject to the budget being out of the House on, that's Monday, May 9th, right?
Yeah.
8th, 7th, out of the House on May 6th. If that doesn't, if it isn't out of the House, we could have a motion to discuss not the Budget Implementation Act, but the subject matter that is in the Budget Implementation Act to get a start on it. Yeah, but we can discuss that as well. Point four, that the committee invite Andrew Trush, Commissioner and Chief Executive Officer, Canada Revenue Agency, Ted Gallivan, CRA Assistant Commissioner, Compliance Programs, Stephanie Henderson, Manager, Offshore Compliance, and other relevant officials from the CRA to appear before the committee on Tuesday, May 17th for a 90-minute televised meeting on the aforementioned study on the CRA's efforts to combat tax avoidance and evasion. And point five, that the committee hear from the Minister of National Revenue on Thursday, May 19th for a 2-hour televised meeting. First hour would be devoted to the committee's study on the Canada Revenue Agency and the tax avoidance and evasion question, and the second hour would be devoted to the main estimates. So that was the conclusion of the subcommittee. Stephen, Mr. McKinnon.
So I'd like to move the...
Moved by Mr. McKinnon. Seconder, Ron? Yes. Seconded by Mr. Leipert. Any discussion, Mr. Leipert?
Very briefly, so just clarification on point number three. Are we proposing that the regularly scheduled time of 11 until 1 be applied each one of those days?
No. As I understand it, and Mr. Caron has been down this path before, I think what Mr. Caron said the other day at the meeting was that we would basically do a blitz that week and try and get as much of the Budget Implementation Act as done as we could, which would mean meeting extended hours for basically the full week.
What is extended hours? For scheduling purposes.
For scheduling purposes, starting at, what was the schedule before, Guy, if you could give us that?
Ça variait.
It varied. It depended on the content of the bills. It could be between 2 to 3 meetings a day for 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the bills that are introduced.
Yeah.
The committee would decide that according to how many.
Yeah, basically, as the clerk indicated, the committee would decide how it would proceed on a day-to-day basis. Mr. Caron?
Understand translation didn't work, so I can translate
Yeah,
as well.
I'm having trouble as well.
Yeah, it varied according to the length and the content of the BIs. It varied usually between 2 and 3 meetings a day for 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the bill.
Okay. Mr. Champagne?
Oui, vous m'aviez demandé, Monsieur le Président, de confirmer. Alors,
You asked me to confirm with regards to point 2, the Minister of Finance is ready to appear, as you indicated, Thursday. The Minister will be there for an hour, as per the usual practice, and the Department of Finance officials will remain for the second hour to answer the committee's questions.
And it's on estimates.
oui, je m'excuse sur le point 2, on main estimates.
Mr. Leipert?
I'm sorry, I got problems with my translation here.
Do you want to...
So I just want-
But I actually have a question.
Okay.
So what's the rush? We seem to have the entire month of June available.
Well, I think the rush basically is to get the Budget Implementation Act through and out of the House and to the Senate, which will take some time.
I don't think that at the steering committee we had a specific decision made on the scheduling per se. We just left the week open for that possibility. Mais je suis d'accord avec Ron. Sorry, I switched to French. Je suis d'accord avec Ron pour dire que si on regarde.
But I agree that if we look at the following week, the riding week, I think May 31st, everything that we discussed as a possibility is the report following KPMG and CRA's appearances. That can be done in June as well. I would say that if we want to take our time to do it, and yet still complete the bill within a reasonable time, we could continue the study the week of the 31st and have the report ready for the beginning of June, and then send it back to the House.
Moi, j'aimerais qu'on se tienne au rapport du sous-comité.
I would like us to respect the subcommittee's report and that we work as diligently and as efficiently as possible during that particular week. And I would like us to accomplish what we can accomplish. When it comes to the Budget Implementation Act, as for the motion, I suggest passing it. I would suggest we produce the committee's report and do what we can.
Just to give a further explanation, Mr. Caron, Mr. Leipert, if we do on the week of the 9th to the 13th, and I don't know how many witnesses we don't know how many will show interest and want to appear, but that week would be for witnesses. Then the next week we are already booked up with other issues and KPMG, CRA issues. Then there's the break week, the last of May. Then the last 31st of May would be our 31st would be our first available time to go to clause by clause if we finish the witnesses that week. So the report won't lock us in to May 9th to the 13th, just if it's doable based on what happens in the House, and go from there.
Ce que je dirais par rapport à ça, c'est que
What I would say about that is that the committee should meet before we have the bill. I'm looking at how thick this bill is. I'm looking at the scope of the clauses that are being put forward, and I want to be careful about what I said in the subcommittee. I don't want to complete the study after a week. I think we should leave the week open. But we did not set a particular date at which the report should be completed and clause by clause had to be done. That's why I agree that we can continue the study during the last week, not to move anything back, but within a reasonable timeline, we can send the bill back to the House, if necessary. We won't assume that it will take us all that time.
Point, Mr. Leipert.
Okay, I'm supportive, but I don't want to go through another harangue of having 90-some witnesses parading through this committee, we did that once. It had let's be honest, zero impact on what was delivered in the budget. And if we're going to parade a bunch of witnesses through here again that have zero impact on changing the budget, I don't want to have people coming here just to show up so that this committee can look like it's listening to people when in fact it really won't be listening to people. Thank you.
I don't want to, as chair, disagree with you, but I will. I disagree that we didn't have any impact. I think some of the witnesses did. But be as it may, question is on the floor. All those in favor of supporting the subcommittee's report? Opposed? Carried. All right, turning then, if we could, thank you, witnesses, for your indulgence. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, May 21st, 2016, Bill C-2, an act to amend the income tax. That is the point of business we are dealing with. We have with the Institut du Nouveau Monde, Nicholas Zorn, who's a policy analyst, and with the Institute for Research on Public Policy, France Saint-Hilaire, Vice President Research, and as well on video conference, Michael Veal is a professor of the Department of Economics at McMaster University, and we haven't found Jack yet.
We have him on the telephone right now.
Okay. And we have, not by video conference, on the telephone at the moment, Jack Mintz, who's with the School of Public Policy, University of Calgary, quite well known. So that is our witnesses for the first hour of our session. Floor is yours, Mr. Zorn.
Bonjour, mon nom est...
My name is indeed Nicholas Zorn. I'm a policy analyst at the Institute du Nouveau Monde. Thank you for having us here today. Our institute has been looking at social and economic inequalities in Quebec and Canada. We know that income inequality has increased a great deal since the 90s. Median income has not really gone up, whereas the wealthiest have seen increase in their revenue greater than that of the rest of the population, thanks to the work of many institutions and organizations. We know that important inequalities are having a negative impact on social mobility, life expectancy, and the health of our democracy. It is in this context that the three measures of Bill C-2 will influence how income is distributed and will have an influence on inequality. In the document that I submitted to the committee, we want to evaluate the effect of this in two ways. First of all, the Institute produced last year and this year an evaluation of the budget. It's a nonpartisan exercise which is intended to evaluate the impact on inequality of the measures in the federal budget and Quebec's budget. This year, we've asked 33 economists and specialists in policy who've come from all political stripes to evaluate the main measures of the federal budget. Essentially, we collated all of their responses and we established a certain level of consensus among them, and we presented comments of what they had to say. The three changes in Bill C-2 may reduce income inequality. The results, the methodology, and the conclusions are in the report. Reducing the second income tax bracket in Bill C-2, the overall effect on inequality would have a lesser impact than the other measures, and the level of consensus is lowest. Half the panelists and specialists consulted consider that this will reduce inequality, but the other half consider that it will not have an impact or may even increase them. This measure is considered a tax break for the middle class, but it mostly benefits the wealthiest. If we look at individual income tax brackets over $90,000 for someone earning $50,000, which could be considered middle class, this would represent $70 of tax savings. For someone who earns $100,000 to $2,000, the gain is much stronger. People who have an income over $90,000 will have a tax increase of about $70 per person. If the intent is to reduce inequality, and to change the level of tax paid by the middle class, there might be other ways to achieve the objective. 5 minutes goes by quickly. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Last point. Adding a second income tax bracket for those who earn $200,000 and more would have an impact. The demonstration can be found in the brief. The reason that the wealthiest 1% have increased their income is because their income advances much more quickly than the rest of the public, 4 times higher than 99%. What this measure will do is slow down the growth of the 1% just enough so that the other 99% might have an increase that is comparable. So yes, this measure will slow down the increased inequality we've observed, but the level of inequality will remain at its historically high level. To bring these inequalities to a lower level, for example, the level that we saw in 1985, income tax levels would have to go from 33 to 39% at the federal level in order to reduce inequality, and that's over the next 25 years. To conclude, if the government and Parliament wish to reduce inequality between the 1% and the 99% in order to further help the middle class, adding additional income tax brackets for the highest income levels would be much more effective, according to many specialists, than to simply increase tax rates of that final tax bracket. When it comes to deductions and tax credits, abolishing certain deductions that benefited mostly the wealthy would be more relevant. In any case, thank you for listening, and please do not hesitate to ask me your questions.
Mr. Zorn, right on time. Ms. Saint-Hilaire, floor is yours. Thank you and welcome.
Bonjour. Est-ce que le micro fonctionne? Oui.
Is the microphone working? Yes. Hello, Mr. Chair. I would like to start by thanking the committee for this invitation to appear today. If you will allow, I will give my presentation in English, but I would be very pleased to answer your questions in the language of your choice.
This morning are based on the results of a 2-year research initiative that the Institute for Research on Public Policy led and just completed to look at income inequality trends in Canada, the factors driving its marked increase since the early 80s, and the role of policy in addressing this problem. We found that income inequality has increased quite significantly over the past 35 years, and this was primarily due to the dramatic rise in the incomes of the top earners and the anemic income growth of the middle class. Given this diagnosis, we would expect that many of the tax measures announced in the recent budget, and in particular the rate increase on the taxable income in excess of $200,000, should provide a substantial policy response to this problem. In the few minutes that I have, I would like to focus on the issues related to top income taxation and the reasons why this might not be as straightforward or as effective a solution as it may appear. First, it's important to point out that it is transfers that do the heavy lifting in terms of offsetting market income inequality in Canada. For instance, in 2011, the tax and transfer system managed to reduce inequality by 28%. And of that, 2/3 was due to transfers, 1/3 to taxes. That 1/3 contribution is not negligible, but it does put into perspective what can be accomplished through the tax system on the inequality front. Second, increasing taxes on top earners will reduce their share of income, but that effect is likely to be limited for 2 reasons. First, the increase in the marginal rate applies only to the share of income that is above the top bracket threshold. And second, top earners can and do respond to tax increases by reducing their reported income through tax shelters and income shifting. I refer to you to the work of Kevin Milligan and Michael Smart on this issue. Now, there's considerable debate on the size of that behavioral response and the real limit to real income taxation. That is, how far can you raise the top marginal rate before the revenue loss due to taxpayer response exceeds the revenue gained from the rate increase? But it's a fine balance that is difficult to find. Third, the taxation of top income also has an important federalism dimension, which all governments need to consider. Because Ottawa and the provinces share the same income base, income tax base, the reduction in reported income due to a top rate increase by one level of government can reduce the revenue of the other level of government. In fact, in some scenarios, the result may be a net loss of revenue overall. Experts seem to agree, however, that the potential for income shifting is larger at the provincial level than at the federal level. In a sense, that is the situation we have now. Most provinces have increased their top marginal rate quite substantially in recent years, and the new federal top rate brings the combined federal-provincial rate in the 48 to 54% range for most provinces. Rates at these levels increase the potential for tax competition among provinces and raise concerns about the loss of mobile labor and income. Indeed, that's probably the reason why the government of New Brunswick decided to reverse its recent tax increase on top incomes. This raises two questions. First, does it matter whether top rate increases are at the federal or provincial level? And second, is there still room for further increases? In our book, we argue that progressive taxation should take place primarily at the federal level. Milligan and Smart's estimates show that provinces' capacity to raise revenue from the same top rate increase varies widely from one region to another. They find that poorer provinces, which already have higher tax rates, stand to gain the least, whereas the opposite is the case for richer provinces because they have a higher share of top earners. The advantages of progressive taxation at the federal level are that, one, it does not engender inefficient tax competition between provinces, since the same rate applies across the country. It entails less scope for income shifting to other jurisdictions, and it means that more revenue from progressive taxation is raised nationally to help fund redistributive federal transfer programs, not only for individuals, but for provinces to fund health and social services. All this makes redistribution through the tax and transfer system more effective and equitable across the country. As for further increases in the top rate, we think it would be preferable to first let the dust settle on the important policy changes implemented since last fall's election. Notwithstanding important reservations regarding the middle-class tax cut, the top rate increase, combined with other measures relating to TFSA's income splitting and the Canada Child Benefit, are expected to make the tax and transfer system more progressive. So it would be wise to let these reforms filter through the system and then to assess their overall impact. And I'll finish on this. Beyond this, we also argue, as others have, like Mike Veal and several others, that the tax system is in need of a major review to reassess the purpose and the incidence of a litany of tax preferences, many of which disproportionately benefit top earners. Until these issues are addressed, further rate increases would only serve to increase the efficiency cost and the inequities of the income tax system. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your last paragraph picked up the ears of Mr. McKinnon there because he's been pushing that point. Thank you very much, Ms. St. Hilaire. Turning then to Mr. Veal first with the Department of Economics, McMaster. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and sorry I can't be there in person as I normally do. 3 points. First, the question is raised, how much revenue will the increase for high-income taxpayers raise? And I'm not going to repeat what France said. I agree with what she said. There is the issue of the erosion of the tax base that is consequent of that increase. And I think, as she correctly said, there should be some emphasis that this has an effect on the provinces as well. While economists are well known for disagreeing, I agree with the C.D. Howe Institute, the Department of Finance, the Parliamentary Budget Office that the federal revenue increase will likely be in the neighborhood from this measure of somewhere between $1 billion and $1.8 billion. It used to be that I would have guessed more towards the low end of that range, but my more recent calculation suggests maybe towards the upper, but nonetheless, as these things go, that's a fairly narrow range. There is one wild card here. There is a recent suggestion in the economics literature that suggests that the effects of a tax increase on top income individuals could perhaps also.
Mr. Veal, could you just slow down a little bit? Translation's having a little bit of difficulty keeping up.
My mistake.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Your volume won't turn up enough?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, just a little slower.
All right, my mistake. I apologize.
And move to the mic as close as you can. Thank you.
Okay. I do not dismiss the possibility that there could be this effect on other income tax brackets that would raise some additional revenue that isn't in the usual calculation. But I do not think that that approach yet has sufficient support to use for current tax policy. My second point is also in support of the Department of Finance and PPO estimates of the revenue effect on the income tax taxes for the $45,000 to $91,000 bracket increase. I think those estimates are also solid. So finally, I will get to my third point, which pertains to TFSAs. As an aside, if you know anyone who is 64 with low enough income to be on the guaranteed income supplement when they turn age 65, please tell them not to make an RRSP contribution, but rather to use TFSAs. The RRSP contribution will likely have a strong negative return because it will be subject to the guaranteed income supplement clawback. And in fact, if they take the money out the next year, it's pretty much that they'll lose half their money, or perhaps even more in some cases. So it's a terrible investment in that case. So that's a good thing about TFSAs, but the flip side of that is also a serious policy problem. Excuse me. There are many ways to put it, but if you think about a $10,000 limit, there will likely be a significant number of individuals reaching age 65, if that were to stay, and they'd reach age 65 with perhaps $500,000 or perhaps $1 million or more in assets, but would still be eligible for full guaranteed income supplement, a program that is intended to help out poor seniors. So more generally, TFSAs have this time bomb aspect. The problems they can create will get worse and worse over time, with the revenue impact almost 10 times greater as a fraction of GDP in 2050 as compared to now. So their effects will get worse. My own view is that the TFSA problem needs to be slowed down while there is a reform that better integrates the taxation of returns to saving and the pension system, because if we expect Canadians to plan 20 or 30 or 40 years ahead, we need governments to do it too. So thank you very much.
Mr. Veal. Turning then on the phone, I guess, to Mr. Mintz. Welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure you can hear me all right.
Can everyone hear okay? I can certainly. Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry technical difficulties made the video conference not work so well this morning, so that's too bad, but hopefully we'll work out something better in the future. I particularly wish to address the issue around dropping the personal marginal tax rate from 22 to 20.5% and raising the top rate from 29 to 33%. It is a reform with both good and bad consequences. The good consequences are associated with the modest reduction in personal income tax rates, roughly between $45,000 and $90,000, that will benefit many middle-income households. Will create some incentive to work and save, but as economic studies suggest, the impacts will be relatively modest. Reductions also will help offset higher marginal tax rates for families with the introduction of the new child tax plan that is income tested, and it also provides some offset to single earner families who benefited from income splitting that was canceled. On the other hand, the increase in the top rate is less justified as a source of revenue. Canada's top rate, an average of 53%, once combined with provincial rates, will be fourth highest in the industrialized world, slightly below France. The top rate hits at roughly US dollars 140,000, a level 1/3 of that in the United States, where the top rate is 46.3%. Of course, we know from experience in the past, when the United Kingdom and France raised their marginal tax rates quite significantly in the case of France, both retracted when they saw that they had a very significant reduction in the amount of income that was collected. Now, there are some important consequences to raising the top rate, as economists have pointed out in various studies. A high top rate will deter talent from staying in Canada or being attracted to Canada, which comes at a time when the Canadian dollar has returned to less than US 80 cents, similar to the years when we experienced the brain drain. In fact, I've talked to a number of businesses, and they're already finding that this is becoming an issue in terms of compensation to attract the very best people around the world to come to Canada. Studies on the migratory effects on the wealthy are few, but we know anecdotally of cases, including a very public one recently in Canada. It's not so much that the loss of the tax base that is important, as much as the talent needed to improve Canada's productivity. Now, the consequences of high marginal tax rates are to particularly discourage entrepreneurial effort by the so-called job creators. The marginal effective tax rate on small businesses, now that the small business tax rate will no longer be reduced, increases by 2 percentage points due to the higher personal income tax rate contained in the federal budget. Now, the discouragement of talent and entrepreneurship can affect economic growth. In an excellent survey published by William McBride of the Tax Foundation in the United States, 21 of 23 studies show that higher taxes reduce growth. The 2 studies showing no relationship were written before 1993. While growth in the United States and Canada was accompanied by high marginal tax rates 50 years ago, a point raised by those arguing that taxes do not affect growth, the typical analysis is so poorly done by mismeasuring effective tax rates that depend on the tax base. For example, Canada did not tax capital gains before 1972. Also failing to include other factors that explain growth and confounding causality whereby growth itself can lead to higher tax rates due to progressivity of the tax system, that these types of studies should be dismissed. Almost all studies using good statistical analysis have shown that increases in marginal tax rates or the top rates reduce growth rates. Robert Barrow, in a well-known paper, shows that the increase in the average marginal tax rate results in reducing per capita GDP by 0.5%. Gammo, Neller, and Zentz estimate that taxes on income and profit are the most damaging to growth, followed by deficits, and then consumption taxes. There's also been people who have estimated the marginal cost of taxation. Bev Dalby at the University of Calgary in the School of Public Policy, where he's one of the international experts in this area, has found that corporate taxes are the most damaging tax to levy in Canada, as well as many other countries, followed by the top rate of the personal income tax. Now, recent studies have also estimated the sensitivity of income tax bases, of the income tax base, to changes in marginal tax rates, of which Michael Veal is one of those individuals who's done some excellent work. Some sensitivity can result from longer run impacts, such as less effort and investment, as well as migration effects. What we don't know very well is migration effects, as there's been very few studies to really analyze that. The tax base can also decline due to tax planning and timing of receipts in the short run, whereby taxpayers, high income ones particularly, are able to do these things in a relatively robust manner according to the law. Now, certainly many taxpayers in 2015 arranged their affairs to report income in 2015 that should lead to a decline in reported income in 2016. And there have been various techniques to do that, as many people know. C.D. Howe Institute, surveying various Canadian American studies, suggested that a 1 percentage point increase in the top rate would lead to a reduction in after-tax income of about 0.69%. The Institute estimated that the federal government will only receive $1 billion from the hike in the top rate, falling well short of the revenue cost of reducing the middle tax bracket. Parliamentary Budget Office, as Michael Veal mentioned, estimates a higher revenue gain by raising the top rate at $1.8 billion in 2016-17, using much lower responsiveness of about 0.38, which is actually well below most studies that are currently been published. The provinces will also lose tax revenue as the base shrinks at the top end. Overall, my belief is that raising the top rate in Canada above 50% to levels similar to 1993 was an error in public policy. It might have been good politics to hit higher income Canadians with higher tax rates, but a far more effective approach could have been used to fund the middle class tax cut. So I've argued in several pieces, several tax incentives benefit higher income Canadians that have narrowed the tax base unduly. Instead of raising marginal tax rates, we should have reduced tax preferences that would have improved both tax efficiency and fairness. So I do hope that one day that the government will find, just as in the United Kingdom and France, that what they did was a mistake and reverse it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mintz. Turning then to questions. Due to the constriction in time, I think if we could go to 5 minutes instead of the 7, we can get more in. Mr. McKinnon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here with us today in Ottawa or by joining us by phone or video conference. The strong theme that seems to be coming out of almost all of your statements is that reducing inequality is largely accomplished by Bill C-2, especially if we consider that Part 1 is the first part is the first act, and then Part 2, which was tabled by the Minister of Finance. If a government intends to reduce inequality, I would like all of you to comment on this. The other thing that seems to be coming out of your respective statements is the necessity of reviewing the tax system.
as well as in your comments in the Globe and Mail on April 18th, that it's time to look at the Income Tax Code, the Income Tax Act, and other witnesses here today have mentioned this as probably a necessary exercise because there are a number of distortions in that. In the Act that whether you look at it through an inequality lens or a tax simplification lens or a proper incentives lens, that tax reform is something that is more or less urgently needed in Canada. So I'd like you to perhaps briefly address both of those points, the inequality point and the tax reform point.
Asking that of all?
Of all of them, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Zorn, do you want to start? And if you don't have a comment, that's fine too.
Deux choses. La première, c'est...
Two things. First of all, when it comes to the tax system, we often hear the fact that it can have a negative impact on the capacity of going to collect revenues, particularly the wealthiest, and that it can have an impact by discouraging additional work and savings. As an example, I will give you Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, people who succeeded in business, I think we can say. They started their businesses in the 70s when the tax rate was very high. That was a period that had a great deal of economic growth. The time that had the most growth was the 30 glorious years, where the tax rate was also very high. I just want to emphasize that if we reduce the opportunities to avoid paying tax, if we broaden the tax basis, we reduce the chances of tax avoidance, particularly among the wealthiest. Reducing inequality has a concrete impact I just want to raise this. In Montreal, for example, between two neighborhoods, for example, Westmount and Hochelaga, Maisonneuve, the difference between life expectancy is 10 years. We're talking about years of life expectancy, which is very concrete. When we talk about a gap between life expectancy, there's the gap between Germany and Bangladesh. That's a good first step. But all we're doing is stopping the growth of inequality. If it remains at a high level, the negative consequences will remain. I just want to put that on the table. Thank you.
Try and tighten the answers a little too. Thank you.
Je voudrais retourner à mon commentaire du départ.
I would like to come back to my opening comment. When it comes to reducing inequality, we need to look at the tax base. We can only go so far through the tax system to counter the growth of inequality. We need to rely on transfers. There's a lot of work to be done on transfer programs, whether it be social assistance, employment insurance, help to seniors. The measures in the federal budget will improve the progressiveness of our system. However, I would say that there's probably still work to be done. Reducing marginal tax rates on the middle class, cutting the rate on the second income tax bracket, perhaps the money that it will cost in terms of revenues that are not collected could have been better concentrated on the middle class. What I was saying is that it's important to really evaluate when we look at the combination of all those measures, because they do interact with each other. We need to take a step back and reevaluate. Have we succeeded in achieving what we wanted to actually do? Perhaps we should review the tax system. I think that's very important. There are many measures, fiscal preferences, that bring benefits, most particularly to those who are wealthiest. That undermines the progressive aspect of the tax system. Thank you.
Mr. Veal, if you a fairly quick comment.
Sure. On inequality, I would focus, as has been spoken about, on tax preferences and on transfers. And in terms of reform, I do believe there is need for an important reform, and one focus should be the sorts of problems we're leaving for the tax transfer system 20 to 30 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mintz?
Yes, a long question, but two very quick responses. To be frank, I am less concerned about inequality. I've always been more concerned about poverty. We have addressed senior poverty to some extent, but not with respect to single seniors, but I was glad with the budget action taken with respect to the top-up of the GIS in that respect. We do have a serious issue of redistribution going on from working to elderly people who are older, things like income splitting, OES, and other things that we have to remember, and we have to ask whether this is the appropriate redistribution we wish when we have some poverty issues to deal with amongst working people. With respect to tax reform in general, the important thing about tax reform, in my view, is giving a framework. And usually the best types of tax reform are ones that lower rates, not raise them, and ones that broaden the tax base to make things more neutral in the business tax structure and in the personal tax structure, also to achieve more neutrality amongst equal resource taxpayers, but also to ensure that we do have the appropriate progressiveness in the tax system. And when you do look at the calculations on progressivity, we do have a progressive tax system in Canada. And there's been publications on that recently. And if one looks at it carefully, I think you'll find that the only question is how progressive do you wish to make it? And we have made it more progressive over the past number of years, quite opposite to what people argue. So I think that generally the important thing about tax reform is to give a government the framework which will allow for dismissing some of the bad ideas that often come about that lead to erosion and narrowness of the tax base and ineffective incentives that are brought in.
Ms. Rayett, thank you all. Ms. Rayett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So from what I'm hearing from the testimony today, what I'm taking away is this tax cut, which is essentially 90 cents a day for the average Canadian in this band. We are going into debt to do it, we are risking unwanted effects on growth. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, when they testified and they wrote their report, they actually indicated in their report that changes drag down the real GDP in the future, which is of concern for me. But, Mr. Mintz, the question I have for you is this, is that a couple of meetings ago, a Liberal member, a government member of this committee, wanted to know if there were any studies in the world that showed that people were deterred by income tax rates when they made more than $217,000 a year. I think in your comments you pointed to some information and studies that actually show the case is the fact that growth is affected and decisions are affected. And anecdotally, I would say that what my research has shown, and maybe you can enlighten us as well in terms of talent erosion in the country, is that starting salaries where you're competing for Canada's brightest minds in technology, where Google and Twitter are offering around the world, the starting salary for somebody coming out of a very good university is $200,000. So I would assume that that's going to play onto their determination of where they want to be able to live and work. So with that, Mr. Mintz, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your analysis that you mentioned before of how growth in the end can be affected by having this increase in the top rate.
Mr. Mintz.
The survey that I mentioned by Will McBride of the Tax Foundation was pretty astounding in that he had 23 papers that have been written in the subject. And it does look at taxes. It looks at what happens when you make the system more progressive, what it does do to growth rates. And I think by and large, most economists would agree that income taxes have the most harm on the economy, corporate taxes more so than the personal tax. And also, if you increase the top rate, you will hurt growth. And this comes out in a lot of the studies that have been done. They're cross-section. They look at countries across the world. They're also time series or look across different states in the United States, et cetera. So I think the numbers are there. Anecdotally, or at least certainly in experience, we do know that when you are hiring top talent, whether it's young people, or let's say you're trying to fill a CEO position, that taxation can play a role. It's not the only thing, but it can play a role. And in fact, often companies, when they have to bring people into Canada, they have to pay equalization to make up for the higher taxes in Canada, which actually adds to the cost of running the business. But if it does dissuade people from coming here because they see Canada as a high-tax country, then that could have a pretty negative impact on our talent. The problem is that the studies on talent and brain drain in the past, there's been some things to sort of show there is an impact. But the one thing that could be done, which I've never seen anyone do, it's very easy to actually look at the income tax forms that the Canada Revenue Agency collects, because people indicate on that form whether they've changed provinces and whether they've changed, moved out of the country, because they then indicate they became a non-resident. And it would be nice to actually start looking at the data with that information to see how taxes might impact on mobility in the sense of people actually moving. And as we know in Alberta, and this is work that I did with Philip Bazell in our paper on the HST in Alberta, that when you look at the personal income tax base in Alberta, until recently, over about 25% of the personal income tax base in Alberta are what you might call high-income households with more than $500,000 in annual income. That's a lot of money. In fact, it's way beyond any other province. And we know that there were many people who, particularly when they got towards retirement, created residency in Alberta, and it's not hard to do that, especially if you decide you like skiing. And so one of the nice experiments we'll be able to see is whether the recent personal income tax hikes in Alberta is actually leading to a migration of high-income people out of Alberta, and that will be interesting to look at.
So in fairness, if the government's motivation for introducing the middle-class tax cut is, one, to deal with income inequality, and two, to spur on growth of the economy, on both of those fundamental promises, this in my opinion, this act fails. I do want to have one other question on income inequality, if I could. I understand, Mr. Zorn, you may have expertise with respect to guaranteed annual incomes, or you have some knowledge of guaranteed annual income and fairness.
Minimum guarantee, yes.
Oui. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this. This committee wanted to study the topic of guaranteed annual income and whether or not you think that's an appropriate thing for us to go down the path of.
D'abord,
First of all,
to a certain extent, Canada already has a partial universal, which is pretty much a paradox, but you get the point. For this particular path, would it reduce inequality or not? Would it be a good thing for the low-income earners? It's really a question of it all depends of the parameters of the measure, because it can make a lot of people worse off, and it's a lot of money that you're putting into a social program that could go instead in terms of public services, in terms of more specific transfers. And I'm not talking about really narrow means tested programs. It should be large, but should it be universal to the point that you are putting a lot of money on the table? And the fact that seniors have, some of them have right now $16,000 per year in transfers, does that mean that if you don't want to have anybody worse off, you have to give everybody $16,000, or else you adapt it a little bit to the needs of the people? So to answer your question, it all depends of the parameters. So that is a question that has no easy answer.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Mr. Caron.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. I would like to gently correct Ms. Raitt, because she mentioned that the tax cut would give 90 cents a day to the average Canadian, but that's not exactly so, because most average Canadians do not benefit from the tax cut, because we're talking about Canadians who earn $45,000 and more. The average is below that, which can be confirmed by Mr. Zorn in his report and presentation. When we talk about 90 cents a day, it's not the average Canadian, it's Canadians who have higher incomes. Mr. Zorn, I really enjoyed your presentation and the report that you produced on the matter of Bill C-2. I have questions for Mr. Zorn, Ms. Saint-Hilaire, and Mr. Veal. I've examined the Parliamentary Budget Officer's analysis of the income tax cut and how to, and instead of reducing 22 to 20.5, we could have reduced the first bracket from 10 to 14. But the government chose not to go in that direction. Mr. Zorn, according to your knowledge of the panel methodology, where would such a tax cut fit in with the overall effect, in terms of overall effect on inequality? One of the comments that came up often on this particular measure was that if the government's objectives are to help the tax base and help the middle class, it led to tax cuts, but to target the middle class, it's a measure that better targeted this group in particular. Instead of taking the second bracket, if we were to take the first tax bracket, more people would benefit from that tax cut. And to compensate for it, to compensate that people have higher incomes so that it does not unfairly benefit those who earn $200,000 and more, if that was the objective of parliamentarians and the government, we could manage upper income tax brackets in order to find a certain balance. The impact that could have on economic growth is more that is felt as we climb the income scale. And the further down we go, the more it's spent. Thank you very much. Ms. Saint-Hilaire. There was a document written by Richard Zucker, an official who worked at the Department of Finance. He looked at who benefited from tax cuts to the second tax bracket. The benefit of that cut is at its maximum at the top end of the scale. And not only that, but those who have incomes higher on that scale really benefit from it. So we determined that people earning $210,000, even though they're paying more tax, will have an overall tax cut more significant than somebody earning $62,000. Yes, exactly. What he suggested was there was a way of recovering those funds, if you will. It would have been to adjust the third bracket in order to perhaps compensate for that tax cut if we really wanted to target the middle class in that second bracket. The suggestion was to look at diminishing the rate for the first bracket, but we still have the same problem. We may have lowered it at the bottom end, but a significant portion of the benefit of the tax cut benefits another group. So it's a question of careful targeting. Mr. Veal.
Je ne sais pas si je dois répéter ma question. C'est simplement de...
I don't know if I should repeat my question. I just want your evaluation of the impact on inequality of alternative measures would have been to reduce the first tax bracket from 15 to 14%, rather than what's proposed in Bill C2, which is a reduction of the second income tax bracket from 22 to 20.5%.
If we think only in terms of income tax, then if you put the reduction at a lower level, then it has a greater effect on reducing inequality. I think you have to think about these things in terms of all the possible measures that may be changed, but in terms of income tax alone, that would certainly be a greater increase in inequality, a greater reduction in inequality, excuse me.
Disons que la mesure qui est dans C2, qui est une...
So the measure in C2, which has been discussed a great deal during and after the campaign, which was supposed to be a middle-class income tax cut, is not the most effective measure in order to help the middle class. That's the conclusion that I've drawn so far. The government also mentions that this is the first measure of a whole host of measures. If I were to take the second, which is currently in the federal budget, there's the Canada Child Tax Benefit, but it will not benefit seniors who earn less than $45,000 or couples without children who each earn less than $45,000 or single individuals who earn less than $45,000. All of those individuals are completely left aside by measures that were put forward to reduce inequality. Is that your analysis as well? There are already measures intended for seniors, such as the Guaranteed Income Supplement. When it comes to the benefit for children, it benefits families who have children, of course. Studies conducted, Luc Godbout from the University of Sherbrooke indicated that the budgetary impacts on families with children, whether they're single-parent families or not, it's clear that the most significant benefits are on the middle class, the income tax bracket we're talking about. When it comes to people who are single or who do not have children, they don't benefit from that measure. However, they will benefit from the cut to the second income tax bracket if they are in that second tax bracket. If we're talking about a senior in the middle class, perhaps $25,000 to $35,000, the GIS does not apply in that particular income bracket. Any comments, Mr. Zorn? We have to keep in mind all of the measures. One thing that struck us when we evaluated the federal budget, it was the fourth time we had done this for a provincial or federal budget. It was the first time we had a budget that actually reduced inequality, and all of the measures evaluated, all 12, reduced inequality. I agree with Mr. Veal and Ms. Saint-Hilaire. We need to look at the entire system of reducing inequality as a whole. When we talk about reducing inequality, which inequalities are we talking about? Are we talking between poor individuals, between the middle class and the wealthiest, between the middle class and the poorest? Increasing taxes for those who earn $200,000 and more does not solve the problem of inequality between the middle class and the poorest, but that's not the objective, for the same reason that the objective is not to go and get money with this measure. The idea is to limit the capacity of the 1% to increase its revenue, because we know that it has a negative impact on the economy and other social situations.
Over and all, first three questioners. Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. When I look at the tax system, for me, it's always a balance between a progressive tax system and a tax system that's efficient, or if I can use the word efficacy. And I think over the last number of years, especially over the last 10 years, the tax system has become much more complicated, much more convoluted. And simplifying the tax system, I think, is always a good thing. But it's always a balance between progressivity and the efficacy of the tax system. Personally, I don't think we need to go back to the 1970s or 60s when marginal tax rates were 70%, and I think during the 1960s were 90%. I don't think that's a good thing. But I think where we have it right now, there's a good balance. We've achieved a balance in the progressive tax system. Much like my colleague, Mr. McKinnon, I do, and I have argued for that we need to take a look at our tax system, but I think that also encompasses looking at retirement and so forth, and how people are retiring, and looking at the big picture. But Mr. Zorn, starting off with yourself, I've read your report, and very quickly, I see you've graded our establishment of the New Child Canada benefit with an A in reducing inequality. If I'm reading your graph correctly, it's about a 1.75. So you've graded it an A. And I believe you've also graded the increase of the GIS for seniors living alone. You've also given that an A minus, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So, and I believe there's a number of things that you've put into the B plus or A category. So if I was a student and I was a finance minister, you've actually given me pretty good marks.
I didn't do it myself. Actually, the 33 experts of the panel gave a certain note, and it corresponds to those letters. So yeah, it's not a bad. Actually, it's a very good grade, and at about C or C minus, going under that notation, you see an augmentation of inequality. So anything that's up of C reduces it. Now, what's the size of the effect? That's so it's good good grades.
And also to just kind of dispel something I think that needs to be put on record is that when you look at the marginal tax rate and the first tax bracket, because some people have called for a reduction in the first tax bracket, I think I have written here about over half of tax filers in that tax bracket actually don't pay any personal income tax at the end of the year when they're filing. So the impact of reducing the second tax bracket, which I believe hits 9 million filers this year. So 9 million filers or Canadians will receive or pay lower taxes, have more disposable income to save, invest, spend money on their families. And it is, several $100s, and I think $100 is a lot of money for a lot of people, including myself. So it's important that we point that out, that in the first tax bracket, you're not, you have over half of filers that actually don't pay any income tax. Is that correct? Would you agree with that?
It makes sense because you have a lot of deductions, a lot of, and that 50% mark of people who don't pay taxes. Most of them are students, elderlies, or people who don't have a job. So, and it all balances out. You have to look at it in a life cycle pattern. Like when you're working a lot, you pay more taxes, but when you're studying or you're retired, you pay less taxes. It balances out.
Okay. And my final question, I'll be very quick, and it is if Mr. Minskin, you can start on it in terms of looking at the Canadian tax system and possibly looking at a review and undertaking because the goal is to have a competitive tax system, not just globally, obviously, and going at that. But if you could, your comment on lower rates and a broader tax base, I just wanted to, if you could expand on that on any level. And I'll leave it after Ms. Mintz argues if we have answers if anybody else wants to jump in as well.
Okay, so when I look at the tax system today, there's been a number of various credits and deductions that have been introduced over the years, and this is what typically happens. You have a system where special credits and deductions and preferences are brought in, and then you kind of look at it and you say, like, what are we doing? Why don't we just have one rate reduction and get rid of this mess and make it simpler, and which reduce administrative costs, compliance costs for taxpayers, as well as reduce distortions in the system. And typically countries every 20 years or maybe even longer, like United States hasn't done this since 1986 and needs to do it badly, they finally undertake a reform. And in Canada, we did quite a bit of reform in 1985 to 87. That also completed with the 1991 GST. But if you look at the system today, there's a lot of special preferences, a little less so now in the business tax structure because of the Technical Committee on Business Taxation report that I chaired that panel in 1997 did lead to a lot of business tax reform, and I would say good tax reform in Canada in the subsequent years. But we haven't done this with the rest of the system. So if you look at the personal tax, for example, it's got all sorts of credits and deductions, and some really have been shown by studies to be not only ineffective, but even harmful to the economy, such as a labor-sponsored venture capital credit that was brought in this budget. And there's been, flow-through shares haven't worked very well. I can go through a litany of this stuff. We also have a complete misalignment now between capital gains tax rates and the top dividend tax rate, which we often try to keep them aligned so that people don't try to pass out income in the form of dividends or capital gains, depending on which is more heavily taxed. And that has actually, I think, is leading to problems. Plus, the two dividend tax credits and the two corporate tax rates have created a lot of complexity and distortions in the system. We clearly need to go to a single corporate income tax rate and a single dividend tax credit. I think would be much better. So when I look at the current system today, I think it is in need of review, and also the GST. Economists often say raise the GST rate, but we actually have a really mediocre value-added tax compared to the rest of the world, collecting roughly half of what it could collect on consumption because of all the special credits and all the special exemptions in the system, and there's a lot of problems, especially around the treatment of financial services. So we need to really have a good look at the whole system, including looking at changing the mix of taxes. If we had a better GST base, maybe more reliance on consumption taxes at the federal level, and less reliance on those growth-inhibiting taxes such as corporate and personal income taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Mintz. Last question this round, Mr. Albes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate all our witnesses' testimony. Dr. Mintz, I'm going to start with you. You mentioned, by the way, I used to be a small business owner, worked very hard in the BC Chamber of Commerce movement, so I've met a lot of small business owners who, whether they be professionals or retail or whatnot, extremely hardworking people. Now, you mentioned the increases at the upper tax rates, coupled with the cessation of small business, the preferential small business reduction, equates to an increase in taxes on small business owners. Could you please just elaborate a bit on that?
Okay, so first of all, when you actually look at the data and you see who benefits from the small business income tax reduction or owning Canadian-controlled private corporations, a lot of the taxpayers, a very large share, 50 to 60%, have household income more than $200,000, and so the increase in the personal tax rate on dividends, which will lead to an increase in taxes on dividends and capital gains coming out of the small business, even if you take into offsetting provisions like the lifetime capital gains exemption, another issue I would deal with. When you take that into account, plus taxes on other income that you withdraw from the business, that actually you do get a very significant increase in the effective tax rate for the entrepreneur with respect to the ownership in their business just by raising the top rate. And that's because so many are in the top income tax bracket. Again, you know, when you're 200,000, I know we always think of this as high income by many people, but really there's a lot of the what I would call the entrepreneurial classes in that group. So it is an issue, and small business is going to be more heavily taxed as a result. The original article I wrote actually took into account moving the corporate income tax rate down from the small business rate from 11 to 9%, as promised in the election campaign and also promised by the previous Harper government. That, of course, has been reversed, and now the small business rate will stay at 10.5%. By the way, I support that change in the budget, not going further, because I want to go to a single corporate income tax rate, not having differential ones. But I do think that that means that this personal tax hike will have an even bigger impact as a result on many small businesses. Just one very final point, and that is I really think that we do need to look at small business incentives and try to make them more effective. And I do think that many small business owners are going to be facing potential hikes that they've seen in property taxes. There'll probably be some payroll tax hikes down the road if we go into CPP expansion, et cetera. So I think these are issues that are going to be important for small business, but there are ways of trying to address that better than what we're doing through the small business deduction.
Now, you also mentioned evidence-based, the CRA collecting, the information people moving out of province, out of country. Do you think it'd be wise for any government, that makes these kinds of changes, not just so that we can, the public sphere, understand what the results of a policy is, but also to add to the academic literature? Do you believe that, good evidence-based decision-making involves tracking? So would you suggest that the government actually take that up to track the ongoing movements, particularly through the CRA?
Yes, it's not hard to do. It can be done through, Department of Finance gives a request to the Canada Revenue Agency for certain types of information. They can even bring in some good academics to work on it, someone like Michael Veal, who is a witness today. And let's try to understand how migration's impacted. And it's not going to happen in a year when you change the tax rate. It's something that could take 2 to 3 years before you see the migration. So you need to understand more the dynamic effects to really understand it more. And that's why I think it's an issue that we really haven't had, I think, a really good study to really fully understand at the top end how sensitive people's residency is to changes in tax rates.
Outcoming of this so that people can understand it, and also we can add to the academic literature, because as you said, I think some of our witnesses said there's not a lot of information on these kinds of issues, and so I hope all sides take a hold of that. Now, just jumping
very quick one, Dan.
Just
you can hold
I did forget one.
Seconds.
I forgot one thing, Dr. Mintz. Succession planning is a huge issue for small business because of our aging demographics. You said 50 or 60% of the household incomes who are small business owners or make more than $200,000. Will this be an issue for them as well? Because the timing for many of these entrepreneurs to suddenly be raising taxes that is quite hard on small business, is that going to create extra challenges from a demographic viewpoint?
It may be. I don't know really the answer to that question because it's something that one would have to study a little bit more carefully. I do know that succession planning is a huge issue for small business. And of course, selling the small business itself is important. And that's where the lifetime capital gains exemption comes in. But I think that we also have to think about rollover provisions and under capital gains taxes and incentives for encouraging initial public offerings like the ones we have in the United States.
Thank you very much, both, for your responses, and thank all witnesses for their presentation. This will conclude our witnesses on C2, and we will suspend for a few minutes and come back to deal with clause by clause. So thank you all for your presentations and your time. The meeting to order. I will just, before we start clause by clause, certainly welcome the witnesses from the Department of Finance here if we need assistance going through the clause by clause. I know, I'm not sure if you both, but I know one of you certainly was at the session last night, so you had a fairly long evening, I'm told, till 11:45. I believe, Trevor, you were there, answering questions. And Mr. Champagne was there chairing as well, so you had a good night providing information. Just for committee's consideration, I'll go through because I know there's a lot of new members on the committee, and just go through an explanation on the clause by clause consideration of a bill by committees, so we're all on the same wavelength. Some will know this procedure, some won't. As the name indicates, this is an examination of all clauses in the order in which they appear in the bill. I will call each clause successively, and each clause is subject to debate and a vote. If there are amendments to the clause in question, I'll recognize the member proposing it, who will likely want to explain it. The amendment will be then open for debate. When no further members wish to intervene, the amendment will be voted on. Amendments will be considered in the order in which they appear in the package each member received from the clerk. And on this one, there's only one amendment proposed, and that's by Mr. Caron. If there are amendments that are consequential to each other, they will be voted on together. In addition to having to be properly drafted in a legal sense, amendments must also be procedurally admissible. The chair may be called upon to rule amendments inadmissible if they go against the principle of the bill or beyond the scope of the bill, both of which were adopted by the House when it agreed to the bill at second reading, or if they offend the financial prerogative of the Crown. If you wish to eliminate a clause of the bill altogether, the proper course of action is to vote against that clause when the time comes, not to propose an amendment to delete it. Since this is a first exercise for many new members, the chair will go slowly to allow all members to follow the proceedings properly. If during the process the committee decides not to vote on a clause, that clause can be put aside by the committee so that we can revisit it later in the process. And I will say that quite often happens if there's discussion on a bill, a little bit on a clause, a little bit of uncertainty, then it can be set aside and come back to at a later time. As indicated earlier, the committee will go through the package of amendments in the order in which they appear and vote on them one at a time, unless some are consequential and dealt with together. Amendments have been given a number in the top right corner to indicate which party submitted them. There is no need for a seconder to move an amendment. Once moved, we will need unanimous consent to withdraw it. During debate on an amendment, members are permitted to move sub-amendments. These sub-amendments do not require the approval of the mover of the amendment. Only one sub-amendment may be considered at a time, and that sub-amendment cannot be amended. When a sub-amendment is moved to an amendment, it is voted on first, which is standard procedure. Then another sub-amendment may be moved, or the committee may consider the main amendment and vote on it. Once every clause has been voted on, the committee will vote on the title and the bill itself, and in order to reprint the bill will be required, so that the House has a proper copy for use at the report stage. Finally, the committee will have to order the chair to report the bill to the House. That report contains only the text of any adopted amendments, as well as an indication of any deleted clauses. So that is the procedure. And with that, we shall start with clause 1. Where's my bill? Right here. Okay. Clause 1, there's an NDP amendment. NDP 1. Guy, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. During the various meetings of the committee on Bill C2, I often came back to the issue of changing income tax rates and the effectiveness they have in relation to reducing inequality or their impact on the economy. From my point of view, it is clear that the measures indicate that tax cuts for the middle class presented by the government is possibly the most ineffective measure of those presented or promised by the government, despite the fact that it's one of their flagship measures. When it comes to the budget, I would like to move an amendment that is within the mandate of the bill. What we can do is change the proposal. Instead of cutting the tax rate for the second income tax bracket from 22.5% to 20%, a measure that would lead to similar costs, which would be to reduce the first bracket from 15 to 14, all income of $12,000 instead of over $45,000. I've amply demonstrated during committee sessions the value of this method. If this government truly wishes to help the middle class, it should allow the entire middle class to benefit from it, not just part of it, including revenues that go well beyond what could be considered middle class, including revenues going from $200,000 to $217,000.
The motion before you, and I'm sure you all have a copy of the bill, so you'll see that the amendment deals by replacing line 1 on page 1, so you can follow it there. Mr. McKinnon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at this modification suggested, looking at the proposal of my honourable colleague, this is the income tax cut promised to Canadians during the election campaign. It was the main subject, the main issue of many debates. This was something that went to the heart of our electoral program and our commitment to Canadians. And I dare say that this is something that may have helped many electors make their choice. Mr. Zorn mentioned earlier, as well as other witnesses, Mr. Zorn talked about this measure as part of a series of other initiatives which are being taken by this government. This tax cut will indeed lead to a break on inequality. It may even improve the situation of inequality in Canada. More important than that, the member wants to take the tax rate from 15% to 14% for the first income tax bracket. I would note that many people in that bracket don't pay taxes. In fact, I would say the majority do not pay taxes for various reasons. I won't go into all of them. Tax credits for GST, tax credits for children, and so on. these individuals do not have to pay any tax because of those measures. All that to say that we oppose this proposed change for the reasons that I have just mentioned. Final point, reducing that tax rate would very negatively impact people in that tax bracket because the tax rate used is also used to calculate tax credits for medical expenditures, tax credits for handicapped individuals, and so on. Those individuals would benefit from fewer tax credits if the tax rate were to decrease. For all of those reasons, we oppose the change. I will give the floor to my colleagues.
Mr. McKinnon, turn to Mr. Caron. I neglected to mention, come to you in a sec, Guy, there was a paper handed around by the clerk, which does not have a title on the top. We just got it. Today, there was a number of questions raised with finance officials and others when they were before the committee. That paper that was handed around relates to responses to questions asked by members on the 12th of April. So just because there's no headline on the top of it, just so you're aware of that. Back to the your amendment, Mr. Caron.
Oui, non, rapidement, je suis heureux que Monsieur.
Very quickly, I'm pleased that Mr. McKinnon considers that most people, if from what I understand of what he said, who earn up to $45,000 pay fewer taxes because of many measures that he mentioned, including measures that are non-refundable tax credits. I would say that, on the contrary, most of those individuals pay their fair share of taxes, and they are the Canadians who require the most help with our through our tax system. They need it more than someone who's earning $210,000 a year, who also is benefiting from a tax cut. The other aspect, and I would invite my colleague to perhaps visit his riding and talk to people who earn less than $45,000 to see if they indeed had the impression during the election campaign that they would be eligible for this tax cut. For my part and many of my colleagues, the reaction was very strong. People earning $35,000 to $45,000 who consider themselves middle class believed that they would benefit from a tax cut, and they were very surprised that their paychecks have not changed at all since the beginning of the year. I haven't seen a great deal of discussion during the election campaign that the rate of 22% would go down to 20.5%. Beyond that, people understood that if they were part of the middle class, they would get a tax cut. And most of what can be defined as middle class did not benefit from one. The amendment I am proposing is something that would propose that those who consider themselves to be middle class receive a tax cut, and it reduces the tax cut for those who earn more than $200,000 a year. That is why I wish to support my amendment.
With all due respect, Mr. Caron, the entire campaign was centered around the middle class income tax cut, and it was clearly stated not only in our party's material, but it also gave an example of, based on your income, based on how many children you have, how much money you'll be saving on these taxes. So it was unequivocally clear what the government was going to do. They were clear what they were going to run on, and this bill is basically fulfilling a campaign promise that we were elected on a platform to cut taxes for the middle class, to invest in the Canada Child Benefit, and a lot of the material throughout the campaign clearly illustrated this. And more importantly, we also made a pledge that we were going to run deficits to stimulate the economy, what your party was not prepared to do.
A little on the end of your statement, I believe we're a little beyond the amendment.
It goes to the heart of the amendment. It seems like, it would increase the expenditure on the government. What they wouldn't be able to, if they were in government today, they would not be able to do his exact amendment.
I'll cut you. I'll cut you there because we're off what the amendment is. Is there any further discussion? Question? All those in favor of the amendment proposed in NDP 1? All those in favor? Recorded vote?
Yes.
Recorded vote. Madam Clerk? All those in
No,
favor?
that's not how it works.
Oh, that's not how it works?
No, they say the name and then they say if they
Okay.
were yea or nay.
Okay.
No, no need to stand.
Just answer yes, sorry. When your name is called, answer yea or nay.
Mr. McKinnon?
Nay.
Yes. Mr. Sabera?
Nay.
Mr. Sanga?
Nay.
Mr. Grewal?
Nay.
Mr. Willett?
Nay.
Ms. Braid?
Nay.
Mr. Albus?
Nay.
Mr. Leipert?
Nay.
Mr. Caron?
Oui.
Motion, the amendment is lost. On the a motion as amended, as on the original motion, shall clause 1 carry?
So moved.
All those in favor of clause 1 carrying? Opposed? Carried. From clause 2 to clause 10, yeah, there is no amendments. Do you want to deal with them as a block, or do you want to go separately?
I would vote block.
Okay.
That's fun. Oh, okay. Oh, you did.
That was Mr. McKinnon. He
Well-
said he'd prefer to deal with them in a block.
Oh,
not
I
both blocks.
thought he said he's voting for the block, and I was thinking
It
that's.
was, Madam Raitt, it was a matter of interpretation, I assure you. All right, on clauses 2 to 10, shall clauses 2 to 10 carry? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Shall the title carry? On division? Carried on division. Shall the bill carry? Shall the bill carry? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Shall the chair report the bill to the House?
Well, that I think we can let you do.
All in favor of that? Carried. Shall the committee order a reprint of the bill for the use of the House at report stage? All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. We've dealt with our first
What a heck of a
bill.
meeting, Mr.
Oh, thank you. Meeting adjourned.